Rose Germain comes from a long line of canallers. Both sides of her family lived on canal boats transporting loads of lumber, coal, sugar, and other commodities from New York to Montreal. Her father and mother met on the canal, and when they married, both families had to tie up to attend the wedding in Waterford. Rose was born on a canal boat. She tells the story of how she happened to be born in Canada.
Well, my father's name was Goodreau, and he was from Champlain, New York. But he and Mother had their boat at the time, and they got froze in. That was the trouble. They only got as far as near Rouse's Point, St. Ours to be exact. And they froze in. So I was born there. That's what happened. But they were both American citizens, so I was automatically a citizen because they were. So I was born in Canada. That was it. Then in the spring we got thawed out and came down again.
After the deaths of her parents, Rose was raised by her maternal grandparents, Mr. and Mrs. John Miner. Two of their sons, raised on the boat, continued the tradition with their own boats when they grew old enough. Her grandparents owned a house on Broadway in Schuylerville, where Rose and her grandmother would disembark while her grandfather continued the trip to Canada. Rose would go to school in the village until he returned, then they'd get back on and winter with the boat in New York City.
East River, yeah, that's where we stayed. And Grandpa would sell his load of potatoes. He would get a load of potatoes there along the canal, near Fort Edward somewhere. And Mr. Daly, and he'd go to New York and he would sell those potatoes. Grandpa didn't know how to write his own name. They'd put an X mark, and that was his signature. But you couldn't fool him on mathematics. He could sell, and he knew what he was getting. So he would, all winter long, he was selling the potatoes. Then in the spring, he'd have to go to the office and try to get a load to go back up north again. And for a load, he only made about $150 when you think about it, And he'd have to take that way from New York City up to wherever they wanted to go, Montreal or Quebec or whatever.
Rose spent her childhood on her grandfather's canal boat until she was 16. By then, he was ready to retire, and Rose, in high school, had to stay ashore all the time. She remembers what life was like while still on the boat.
Well, it was a slow life. It took us about 5 days to come up from New York City to Albany. So I can remember that he'd start me in school in New York, like in May. And I'd leave in May, But then I can remember sitting on top of the cabin, and we had a hammock. And I can remember writing out my timetables. I'd do it over and over and over. 1 times 1 is 1, 2 times 2 is 4. Did the whole series, I can remember that. But there were a lot of memories. For drinking water, we had a big tank in the boat, in the cabin. And we came to a certain part of the Hudson down there below Albany. Well, it was not too far out of New York City, really. But everybody would fill up their tanks. He had a pail, and he'd pull it up. He had a big rope on the pail and dip it in the water down there and fill up the tank. And we drank that water. Today, you wouldn't dare do that, It's supposed to be a certain part that was full of springs. And then I can remember the little tugboat would come out to meet us from the shore, and he would have ice cream, and bread and milk, and well, that was a great thing when he came out. He even had penny candy. So it was great to see that tugboat come out. Grandpa would have a clothesline when it was wash day. Grandma had to wash on the board. Grandpa had a bench, and she had 2 tubs, I can remember. And she'd wash on one on the board, and then rinse in the other tub. And she had to bring everything out by hand and hang it up on the clothesline. And I remember one time I had the nicest dress. I think it was a new little dress I had. Well, the wind was blowing awful hard, and right off the clothesline, right in the river. That was terrible. I saw my dress, and it didn't float. It just went right under.